The scent of white roses and polished wood clung to the air, thick enough to taste. I remember thinking how strange it was that grief had a smell. Not sharp like something burning, not sweet like perfume, just heavy. Like something pressing on your chest, refusing to let you breathe. I stood beside Daniel's coffin, my fingers hovering just above the edge. I couldn't bring myself to touch him again. I had already done that once, earlier, when the room was empty. His skin had been so cold it frightened me. That wasn't my husband. That wasn't the man who used to laugh too loudly at his own jokes, who left coffee cups everywhere, who always forgot where he put his keys. That was just a body. At 67, I never imagined I would bury the man I built my life with. 42 years of marriage, gone in less than 4 months. Cancer doesn't ask permission. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It just takes. Lily, do you want to sit down? The funeral director's voice pulled me back. Gentle, practiced, detached in a way that only people who see grief every day can be. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if my body would cooperate. Somehow my legs moved. Somehow I found myself in the front row, surrounded by blurred faces and whispered condolences that sounded like they were coming from underwater. I'm so sorry for your loss. He was such a good man. If you need anything. Need anything? I almost laughed. What could anyone possibly give me that would make this better? I nodded politely. I even managed a few quiet thank yous. It felt like watching myself from outside, like I was playing the role of a grieving widow in a poorly written play. Next to me sat Clara, my daughter-in-law. She looked perfect. Her black dress fit flawlessly, her makeup untouched except for the occasional careful dab beneath her eye. Even her grief seemed curated. She reached for my hand, squeezing it lightly. We'll get through this together, Lily, she whispered. I looked at her, searching for something real, something human. For years, I had tried to love her like a daughter, tried to ignore the small things, the sharp tone, the subtle distance, the way she always seemed just a little too polite. Today, she looked like the perfect widow. And for a moment, I believed it. I need some air, she murmured after a while, standing gracefully. I nodded again, watching her walk away. I remember thinking, we'll need each other now. I didn't know how wrong I was. About 10 minutes later, I realized I needed my medication. My hands were starting to shake, and the dull ache in my joints had turned into something sharper. I stood slowly, leaning on my cane, and made my way down the hallway. The funeral home was quiet outside the main room. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes every step echo. As I turned toward the restroom, I heard voices. Clara's voice. But it sounded different. Lighter. Almost relieved. Oh my God, I thought this day would never end, she said, followed by a small laugh. I froze. Another woman responded. You held it together pretty well. I had to, Clara replied. Everyone's watching. But honestly,
I'm exhausted pretending.
Pretending? My grip tightened on my cane. What happens now? The other woman asked. There was a pause. Then Clara said, clearly and coldly, now I finally get my life back. My heart skipped. And Lily, the woman pressed. Clara let out a soft, amused sigh. Oh, I'll take care of that. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. There's a facility just outside the city. Clean, quiet, affordable. Perfect for someone her age. I felt like the floor tilted beneath me. She won't go easily, the other woman said. Clara laughed, a sound I had once thought was warm. With what choice? The house is in my name. Daniel made sure of that years ago. That wasn't true, was it? You remember when she sold her home? Gave us the money to manage? Clara continued. She signed everything over. She doesn't even realize she has nothing left. My breath caught. And Daniel's will? the woman asked. Clara lowered her voice slightly, but I could still hear every word. Everything goes to me. Of course. I made sure of it. The hallway spun. In a week, she added casually, she'll be packing her bags. I don't remember how I got back to my seat. I just remember sitting there, staring at Daniel's coffin, hearing Clara's voice echoing in my head over and over again. That old woman, she has nothing left. Had he known? Had Daniel known what she was planning? Or worse, had he trusted her too? When Clara returned, she slipped back into her seat beside me, her expression soft and sorrowful once again.
She reached for my hand.
I'm here for you, she said gently. I looked at her,
Really looked this time.
and for the first time in 15 years, I saw nothing there. The rest of the funeral passed in fragments. Voices, faces, the sound of dirt hitting wood, the finality of it. By the time we got into the car, I felt hollow. Clara drove. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the world continued like nothing had happened. How are you holding up? She asked. Her voice was perfect, concerned, controlled. I'll manage, I said quietly. And I would. Because there was one thing Clara didn't know. One thing Daniel told me just days before he died. He had taken my hand, his grip weak but urgent. Lily, listen to me carefully, he whispered. There are things you don't know. About Clara, about the house, about everything. I had tried to calm him, thinking it was the medication. But he shook his head.
No.
I made changes. I fixed it. At the time, I didn't understand.
Now.
I was starting to. That night, I lay awake in the guest bedroom, the room I had lived in for the past 6 years, never quite feeling like it belonged to me. Clara's words replayed in my mind like a broken record. Nursing home. She has nothing. Everything goes to me. But Daniel's voice pushed through the noise. I fixed it. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, my grief slowly transforming into something else. Something sharper. Something stronger. Clara thought she had already won. She thought I was weak, dependent, powerless. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Let her think that, I whispered into the darkness. Because tomorrow, we would read Daniel's will, and everything would change. The morning of the will reading arrived too quickly, as if the night had been cut short on purpose. I barely slept, not because of grief this time, but because my mind refused to quiet down. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Clara's voice again.
Cold. Certain.
Victorious. It replayed like a whisper I couldn't escape. By the time the sun rose, pale and indifferent through the curtains, I was already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed with my hands folded in my lap, waiting. Waiting not just for the reading of the will, but for the truth. A soft knock broke the silence. Grandma? It was Oliver, my grandson. His voice was hesitant, like he wasn't sure what version of the world he would step into if he opened the door. Mom said we're leaving in 40 minutes. I'm ready, I answered, though I didn't feel ready at all. He stepped inside anyway. At 14, he was at that strange age where he was both a child and not anymore. He looked so much like Daniel at that age it made my chest ache. The same thoughtful eyes, the same way he seemed to observe everything quietly before speaking. I miss him, he said suddenly. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything anyone had said at the funeral. I know, I replied, standing slowly. So do I. He hugged me, tighter than I expected, and for a moment, I allowed myself to lean into it, to feel something real, something not rehearsed or hidden behind polite expressions. Over his shoulder, I saw Clara in the hallway. She was already dressed, a tailored navy suit this time, her hair perfectly styled, her face composed. Not a trace of yesterday's grief remained. Oliver, she said smoothly, let your grandmother finish getting ready. Her eyes met mine. There it was again, that flicker of something cold beneath the surface. Today is important, she added. Yes, I said quietly. It is. The drive to the law office felt longer than it actually was. No one spoke. Clara focused on the road, her posture straight, her hands steady on the wheel. Oliver and his younger sister Sophie sat in the back, unusually silent. I watched the city pass by outside the window, thinking about how strange it was that everything looked the same when everything had changed. The building itself was unremarkable, gray, professional, forgettable. The kind of place where life-altering decisions were made behind closed doors while the outside world carried on without noticing. Inside, everything smelled faintly of paper and polish. We were led into a conference room with a long wooden table and tall windows that let in too much light for a day like this. Mr. Whitaker, Daniel's attorney, greeted us with a solemn nod. He had known Daniel for years, had handled everything from business matters to estate planning. If anyone knew the truth, it would be him. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing for us to sit. Clara took her seat immediately, placing her handbag neatly beside her, her expression calm but alert. I noticed the way her fingers tapped lightly against the table, a small sign of impatience she probably didn't realize she was showing. Oliver sat next to me, close enough that our arms touched. Sophie stayed on Clara's other side, looking down at her hands. Mr. Whitaker adjusted his glasses and shuffled the papers in front of him. Before I begin, he said, I need to inform you that Daniel made amendments to his will approximately 5 weeks before his passing. Clara's tapping stopped. Amendments? She repeated, her tone carefully controlled. What kind of amendments? He requested a private meeting, Mr. Whitaker replied. He was very clear about his intentions. A brief silence followed. I could feel the shift in the room, subtle, but unmistakable. Something had changed, and Clara felt it too. Well, she said after a moment, forcing a small smile. Please go ahead. Mr. Whitaker nodded and began. The primary residence, along with the vacation property in Aspen, will be placed into a family trust. I felt my breath catch. The trustee of this trust will be Lily Carter. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. Clara didn't. What? She said sharply, sitting up straighter. That's not possible. Mr. Whitaker continued, as if she hadn't spoken. The terms of the trust grant Lily Carter full residential rights to both properties for the remainder of her lifetime. Upon her passing, ownership will transfer equally to Oliver and Sophie. Clara's composure cracked, just slightly. The house is in my name, she said, her voice tightening. Daniel can't just. He transferred his ownership share into the trust 3 years ago, Mr. Whitaker interrupted calmly. With your signed consent. The room went still. I remembered signing documents back then. Clara had explained it as routine, something about simplifying things, avoiding complications later. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? Clara's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. That doesn't make sense, she finally said. I would remember something like that. You did sign the documents, Mr. Whitaker replied evenly. I have copies here. He placed a folder on the table. Clara didn't reach for it. Instead, she sat back slowly, her eyes narrowing.
Continue, she said.
And so he did. Daniel's financial assets, totaling approximately $920,000, will be distributed as follows: 60% into a trust for Oliver and Sophie, 20% directly to Lily Carter, and 20% to Clara Carter. This time, Clara stood up. 20%, she snapped. That's ridiculous. I'm his wife. Mr. Whitaker didn't flinch. These were Daniel's explicit instructions. He wasn't thinking clearly, she insisted.
He was sick.
He was on medication. I personally evaluated his mental state during our meetings, Mr. Whitaker replied. Additionally, his physician provided written confirmation of his full cognitive capacity at the time. Clara's eyes flicked toward me, and in that moment there was no mask, just anger.
Raw.
Sharp. Blaming. You did this, she said under her breath. I didn't respond, because the truth was, I hadn't. Daniel had. And for the first time since his death, I felt something that wasn't grief. It was relief. Is there anything else? Clara demanded. Yes, Mr. Whitaker said, folding his hands. There is also a provision regarding a monthly allowance. You will receive $3,500 per month for a period of 5 years, or until remarriage. Remarriage, she echoed, her voice hollow. Yes. The word hung in the air like a quiet accusation. Clara laughed then, but there was nothing amused about it. This is insane, she said. I'm contesting this. That is your right, Mr. Whitaker replied. However, I would advise caution. Daniel anticipated that possibility. He reached for another envelope. He left a sealed letter to be opened in the event that the will is contested. Clara froze. Something shifted again, deeper this time. What's in it? She asked. Mr. Whitaker met her gaze. I believe, he said carefully, it would be best if you chose not to find out. Silence filled the room.
Heavy.
Unavoidable. Clara slowly sat back down. Her confidence, the certainty I had heard in her voice the day before, was gone. Not completely, but enough. We're done here, she said coldly. But we weren't. Not even close. Because as I sat there, listening to the echo of Daniel's choices, I realized something important. He hadn't just written a will. He had prepared for a battle. And now, that battle was about to begin. The silence in the car on the way back from the lawyer's office was nothing like the silence on the way there. Before, it had been heavy with grief. Now it was sharp, brittle, like glass ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. Clara drove faster than usual, her movements precise but tense, her jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch. Oliver and Sophie sat in the back, confused and quiet, their eyes moving between us, as if trying to understand what had just happened without asking the questions forming in their minds. I kept my gaze forward, my hands resting calmly on my cane, though inside, everything felt like it was shifting into place. The moment we stepped into the house, Clara dropped her handbag onto the table with more force than necessary. The sound echoed through the hallway like a starting gun. This isn't over, she said immediately, turning toward me. Her voice was no longer soft, no longer controlled. It was stripped of pretense. I took a slow breath. I didn't expect it to be. You think you've won? She continued, stepping closer. You think Daniel just suddenly decided to hand everything to you? That doesn't happen without influence. I didn't ask him for anything, I replied evenly. She laughed, sharp, humorless. Of course you didn't. You just played the helpless widow, the poor, fragile mother. You knew exactly what you were doing. Oliver shifted behind us. Mom, go upstairs, Clara snapped without even looking at him. But
now.
The authority in her voice silenced him. I heard their footsteps retreat, hesitant and slow. When they were gone, Clara turned back to me, her expression colder than I had ever seen it. I'm contesting the will, she said. And when I do, everything goes back to how it should be. Which is? I asked quietly. Mine, she said without hesitation. This house, the assets, everything Daniel and I built. I held her gaze. We built it too, with money Daniel and I earned over a lifetime. Her eyes flashed. That money was given to us. For safekeeping, I said. For investment, she corrected sharply. Don't twist it. I didn't argue further. There was no point. Clara wasn't interested in truth, only control. Do what you feel you need to do, I said finally. Oh, I will, she replied. And when this is over, you'll be exactly where you belong. The words hung between us. This time, she didn't bother hiding what she meant. 3 days later, I was served with legal papers. I had expected it, but that didn't make it any easier to see my name printed there, framed as something ugly. The claims were exactly what Clara had threatened: undue influence, lack of mental capacity, manipulation. According to her, Daniel had not been in his right mind, and I had taken advantage of that. It would have been almost laughable if it weren't so serious. I sat at the kitchen table, the documents spread out in front of me, my hands steady in contrast to the storm building inside me. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt anger, not loud or explosive.
Cold.
Focused. Determined. I reached for my phone and dialed the one person I knew I could trust without question. Margaret, I said when she answered. Lily? What's wrong? I closed my eyes briefly. I need a lawyer. There was a pause, not of hesitation, but of calculation. I know exactly who you need, she said. That's how I met Rebecca Lynn. She wasn't what I expected. No dramatic presence, no intimidating demeanor. She was calm, composed, and sharp in a way that didn't need to be announced. When she finished reading through the documents, she looked up at me with a clarity that felt grounding. This is elder financial exploitation, she said plainly. Your husband recognized it. That's why he made those changes. You really think so? I asked. I don't think, she replied. I know the pattern, and we're going to prove it. For the first time, I felt something close to reassurance. Clara's next move came quickly. She tried to have me removed from the house. Legally. Rebecca blocked it just as quickly, filing an emergency order that secured my right to remain until the case was resolved. Clara didn't take that well. She stopped speaking to me entirely after that. But silence didn't mean peace. It meant strategy. Soon after, I began to notice changes, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Phone calls that ended when I entered the room. Conversations cut short. The children coming home with strange questions. Grandma, are you okay? Sophie asked one afternoon, her voice small. Of course I am, I said gently. Why wouldn't I be? She hesitated. Mom said you might be confused sometimes. The words landed harder than any accusation Clara had thrown directly at me. I'm not confused, I said carefully. I promise you that. Oliver, standing behind her, frowned. She also said you might need help, like a special place. There it was.
The plan.
Not just to take the house, but to remove me completely. I felt something inside me settle. Not fear. Resolve. Listen to me, I said, looking at both of them. I'm not going anywhere. They searched my face, trying to decide what to believe. I trust you, Oliver said finally. Clara appeared in the doorway at that exact moment. Kids, she said sharply, homework. They left reluctantly. Her eyes locked onto mine. Be careful what you tell them, she said quietly. I decide what's best for my children. And Daniel trusted me to protect them, I replied. Her expression hardened. This isn't over, she repeated. The legal battle dragged on. Weeks turned into months. Clara's attorney filed motion after motion, each one designed to exhaust, to delay, to pressure. It was clear what she was doing, not just trying to win, but trying to make it too difficult for me to continue. She underestimated something. I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for dignity, for truth, for Daniel. And that made me stronger than she expected. Then one evening, something changed. I found Clara in Daniel's office. She wasn't just standing there. She was searching. Drawers open. Papers moved. Focused. "What are you looking for?" I asked from the doorway. She startled, then quickly recovered. "This is my house. I can look wherever I want." "You're looking for something specific," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Mind your own business." She brushed past me, but I saw it.
Panic.
Not obvious, but real. That was the moment I knew. There was something she was afraid of. Something she didn't want found. That night, after she left, claiming another work dinner, I went into the office myself. The room still smelled faintly like Daniel's cologne. It stopped me for a moment, the familiarity of it, the memory of him sitting at that desk, focused, thoughtful. "I'll finish this," I whispered. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I trusted him. Drawer by drawer, file by file, I searched. And then I found it, taped beneath the bottom drawer. A small envelope, with my name on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a USB drive. And a note. I recognized Daniel's handwriting immediately. "Lily, if you're reading this, it means things went the way I feared." My breath caught as I continued. "I didn't have time to tell you everything, but I saw enough. I gathered what I could. The truth is here. The truth." I stared at the small device in my hand. Whatever was on it, Clara didn't want it found, which meant I absolutely needed to see it. I didn't wait until morning. I didn't sit and think or question whether I was ready. Some instincts don't come from logic. They come from something deeper, something that knows when the moment matters. I took the USB drive straight to my room, closed the door quietly behind me, and sat down at the small desk by the window. For a few seconds, I just held it in my hand, staring at it like it might explain itself before I even plugged it in. This tiny object, whatever was inside it, had been important enough for Daniel to hide, to protect, to leave for me as a final safeguard. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Clara wasn't just afraid of losing money. She was afraid of being exposed. My laptop felt unusually loud as it powered on, every small sound amplified by the tension in my chest. When the screen lit up, I hesitated for just a second longer, then inserted the drive. A folder appeared almost instantly. No password.
No encryption.
Just Daniel's quiet confidence that I would find it and understand. I clicked. There were dozens of files, neatly organized, labeled with dates, emails, bank statements,
Audio recordings.
even scanned documents. My heart started pounding as I opened the first file.
It was a bank statement.
At first glance, it looked ordinary: joint accounts, regular transactions, nothing unusual. But then I noticed a pattern. Small transfers. Not large enough to raise immediate suspicion, but consistent. Frequent. Always moving from shared accounts into another account under Clara's name only. I opened another file. And another. The pattern repeated. Over months. Then years. The amounts grew larger over time, as if caution had slowly been replaced by confidence. By the time I reached the most recent statements, the numbers made my stomach turn. She hadn't just been careless. She had been methodical. I leaned back, pressing my hand to my mouth as the realization settled in. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was theft. My eyes moved to the next folder. Emails. I hesitated before opening them, though I already knew what I would find. The first message was enough. "I miss you already. Last night was incredible." It was signed with a name I had seen before. Ryan. My chest tightened as I kept reading. The messages stretched back nearly 2 years. Not vague or ambiguous, direct, intimate, undeniable.
Plans.
promises, conversations about when everything changes, about finally being free, about building a new life somewhere else. Arizona. The word appeared more than once. And then, the tone shifted. We just have to wait a little longer. He's getting worse. The doctors say it's aggressive. I can't keep pretending forever. I stopped. My hands were shaking now. She hadn't just been having an affair. She had been waiting for my son to die. I closed my eyes, but the words stayed there, burned into my memory. When I opened them again, I forced myself to continue, because I needed to see all of it, not just the parts that hurt, but the parts that proved the truth. The final folder was labeled simply
Audio.
I stared at it for a long moment. Then I clicked. The first recording crackled slightly before voices became clear. Clara's voice.
Light.
Casual.
Dangerously familiar.
Once everything is settled, we'll sell the house. A man's voice, Ryan's, responded. And your mother-in-law? Clara laughed softly. She won't be a problem. There are places for people like her. My chest tightened. You mean a nursing home? He asked. Exactly, she replied. Somewhere quiet. She won't fight it. She doesn't have the resources. There was a pause. And the money? Once everything's transferred, it's ours.
Clean break.
New start. I couldn't listen anymore. I stopped the recording, my breath uneven, my hands trembling so badly I had to place them flat on the desk to steady myself. Daniel had known. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to understand who Clara really was. Enough to protect me. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't just from grief this time. They were from something sharper, something clearer. He hadn't been blind, and neither would I be anymore. The next morning, I called Rebecca. I need you to come over, I said. There must have been something in my voice, because she didn't ask questions. I'll be there in an hour. When she arrived, I led her straight to my room and handed her the laptop. She sat down, her expression focused, and began going through the files one by one. I watched her carefully, looking for any sign, doubt, hesitation, anything that might suggest this wasn't enough. I didn't see any. Instead, I saw something else.
Certainty.
When she finished, she closed the laptop slowly and looked up at me. This changes everything, she said. My shoulders dropped slightly, the tension I hadn't realized I was holding beginning to release. It's enough? I asked. It's more than enough, she replied. Financial misconduct, documented intent, recorded statements. This doesn't just defend the will. It dismantles her entire case. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to control. What happens now? I asked. Rebecca's expression sharpened slightly. Now, she said, we stop reacting and we start proving. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Not grand or dramatic, just contained, which somehow made everything feel more intense. I sat beside Rebecca, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my posture straight despite the tension in my body. Across the room, Clara sat with her attorney, her expression carefully composed once again. If someone walked in without context, they would see a grieving widow fighting for what was hers. They wouldn't see the truth.
But they were about to.
The judge entered, and the room settled into silence. Proceedings began with formalities, statements, arguments I barely registered. Clara's attorney spoke confidently, emphasizing Daniel's illness, suggesting vulnerability, implying influence, without directly accusing. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She stood calmly, her voice steady, her presence controlled. Your Honor, she began, we have newly discovered evidence that directly contradicts the claims made by the petitioner. Clara's posture shifted slightly.
Subtle.
But noticeable. Rebecca continued. This evidence demonstrates not only that Mr. Carter was fully aware of his circumstances, but that he acted deliberately to protect his estate and his family from financial exploitation and personal misconduct. The words hung in the air. Clara's composure didn't break, but it cracked. Just enough. "Permission to present the evidence," Rebecca said. The judge nodded, and everything changed. The courtroom felt different that day, even before anything was said. It wasn't just quieter, it was heavier, as if the truth itself had weighed and had already settled into every corner of the room. I sat beside Rebecca, my hands folded the same way they had been the last time, but I wasn't the same person anymore. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just reacting now. I understood what we had. I understood what Daniel had left behind, not just evidence, but protection. Across the aisle, Clara sat perfectly still, her posture flawless, her expression carefully neutral. But I had seen behind that mask. I knew what lived underneath it now, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of her. The judge began without delay. There was no unnecessary formality, no wasted words. This wasn't a dramatic trial. It was a decision waiting to be confirmed. Rebecca stood when called, her movements calm, controlled, as if she had already walked through this outcome in her mind and was simply guiding everyone else toward it. "Your Honor," she said, "we would like to formally submit the evidence recovered from Mr. Carter's personal records." Clara's attorney immediately rose. "We object." But the judge lifted a hand. "I will review the material," she said firmly. "Proceed." And just like that, the foundation Clara had built her case on began to crack. The evidence was presented methodically. Not rushed, not exaggerated, simply laid out, piece by piece. Financial records showing the transfers. Emails that removed any doubt about the affair. And finally, the recordings. That was the moment the room changed completely. There is something different about hearing a person's own voice, something undeniable, something that strips away all argument. Clara didn't react at first. She kept her eyes forward, her face composed. But I watched her hands. They tightened slowly, her fingers pressing into each other as if she could physically hold herself together. Then Rebecca called the final witness, Ryan. He walked into the courtroom looking nothing like the confident man I had imagined from the emails. He avoided Clara's gaze entirely, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if he already regretted being there. When he took the stand, his voice was quiet but clear. "State your relationship with Clara Carter," Rebecca said. He swallowed. "We were involved for about 2 years." A murmur passed through the room, quickly silenced. "Can you clarify what you mean by involved?" "Romantically," he said. "We were in a relationship." Clara's composure finally broke. "You're lying," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "Mrs. Carter," the judge warned. But the damage was done. Ryan continued, answering each question with reluctant honesty. He confirmed the plans, the discussions about waiting, about leaving, about starting over once Daniel was gone. And then the final question. Did Clara Carter ever discuss her intentions regarding Lily Carter? There was a pause. Then he nodded. She said, once everything was settled, Lily would be placed in a care facility, that it would be easier that way. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. The kind that doesn't need interpretation. I didn't look at Clara. I didn't need to. The truth was no longer something hidden between walls or whispered in hallways. It was out. And it was undeniable. The ruling came a week later. I remember sitting in the same room, in the same seat, but feeling something entirely different. Not fear. Not uncertainty.
Clarity.
The judge spoke carefully, deliberately, as if each word mattered. The petition to contest the will is denied. That was it. Simple. Final. Everything Daniel had put in place held. Clara didn't speak. She didn't argue. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing left to say. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful. Not immediately, but settled. Like a storm had passed and left everything still, though not untouched. Clara moved through the house like a stranger, her presence sharp but temporary. There were no more arguments, no more attempts to manipulate or control. Just distance. Then one morning, she was gone.
No dramatic farewell. No confrontation.
Just absence. She took what was hers, the portion Daniel had allowed, and left. I heard later that she moved across the country. With Ryan. Though that didn't last long. Some things, it seems, aren't meant to survive outside of secrecy. The children stayed. That was never a question for me, but it was for them. And I knew that. I didn't push. I didn't persuade. I let them choose. Oliver chose first. I'm not going with her, he said one evening, standing in the doorway of the living room, his voice steady in a way that made him seem older than he was. I want to stay here. Sophie took longer. She was quieter, more uncertain, caught between love and disappointment, between what she had believed and what she now knew. But in the end, she stayed too. The first months were the hardest. Grief doesn't disappear just because justice is served. If anything, it becomes clearer. The children weren't just mourning their father. They were mourning the version of their mother they thought they had. That kind of loss is different. More complicated. Harder to explain. We went to therapy together. We talked. Sometimes we cried. Sometimes we just sat in silence. And slowly, we began to rebuild. 2 years have passed. The house feels different now. Not because it changed, but because it finally feels like it belongs to us. I moved into the master bedroom, something that once felt impossible. I changed it slowly, carefully, removing what didn't feel right, adding what did. It's still the same space, but it holds different energy now. Lighter, warmer. Oliver is taller than Daniel ever was. Thoughtful, quiet, strong in ways that don't always show immediately. He talks about studying business, about continuing what his father started. And when he does, I see Daniel in him, not just in his face, but in the way he thinks. Sophie found something different.
Creativity.
She sketches constantly, designs, ideas, buildings that don't exist yet but feel like they could. She shows me everything, her eyes bright with excitement. Do you think Dad would like this? She asks. And every time, I tell her the truth. He would love it. We still visit Daniel. Not as often as we did in the beginning, but enough. Enough to remember. Enough to feel close. Last time, as we walked back to the car, Oliver put his arm around my shoulders, something he does without thinking now. You know what I think, he said.
What?
I think he knew we'd be okay. I smiled. I think you're right. Sophie nodded beside us. And I think he made sure of it. That night, I sat alone for a while before going to bed. The house was quiet, not empty, just peaceful. I looked around and thought about everything that had almost happened. The future Clara had planned. The life where I would have been pushed aside, forgotten, reduced to something small and inconvenient. And then I thought about where I was instead. Here, still standing, still part of something real. I reached for the photo on my bedside table. Daniel, smiling the way he always did, like he knew something good was coming. You were right, I whispered. Not just about Clara. About everything. He hadn't just left us security. He had left us a chance. To heal. To rebuild. To choose each other. And, in the end, that was worth more than anything she tried to take. As I turned off the light, I allowed myself one final thought before sleep. They say the best revenge is living well. But this wasn't revenge. This was something better. This was peace.